She rolled her eyes when he spoke of war, expecting another ego-filled tale from an old man with too many memories. But when Elias Thorne pulled a wooden bird from his pocket and spoke of a brother who never came home, the whole studio went still. Welcome to Stallone Unleashed. Let's uncover what really happened. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a gas bill and a circular for a hardware store. Its thick, cream-colored cardstock an anomaly in the usual detritus of Elias Thorne's mailbox. The Spotlight Hour, it announced in elegant, embossed script, requests the honor of your presence. Elias had held it for a long moment. The weight of the paper surprisingly substantial, like a summons rather than an invitation. He wasn't a man for spotlights. His life was lived in the quiet hum of his workshop, the scent of sawdust and old wood his constant companions, the rhythmic scrape of his tools a more familiar music than any applause. Yet, there was a name mentioned within the typed lines, a producer he'd spoken to briefly months ago, a fleeting conversation about heritage crafts and the stories embedded in them. He'd almost forgotten. The show, he knew, was a whirlwind of celebrity chatter, fleeting trends, and opinions packaged for mass consumption. It was everything he was not. His initial instinct was to decline, to let the invitation find its way to the recycling bin with the other glossy demands for attention. But something stayed his hand. A sense of duty, perhaps, or a stubborn refusal to let certain truths be entirely swallowed by the noise. In his breast pocket, pressed against his heart by habit, rested a small, worn wooden bird, its form smoothed by decades of touch. It was a relic of a promise, a whisper from a past that never quite faded. He'd carved it himself, long ago, for hands that were no longer there to receive it. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance, however small, to give that silence a voice, not for himself, but for the echoes the bird represented. He arrived at the studio on a crisp autumn morning, the city already thrumming with an artificial energy that seemed to bounce off the glass and steel. The air inside the monolithic building was different, chilled, sterile, smelling faintly of cleaning fluid and something vaguely floral that couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of hurried makeup and latent anxiety. Corridors, painted in shades of optimistic but ultimately soulless pastels, buzzed with people moving too quickly, headsets clamped to their ears, clipboards clutched like shields. Elias moved through it all at his own pace, a study in deliberate motion. His worn tweed jacket, a gift from his late wife, felt like an anchor in the sea of transient fashion. He clutched the small, soft leather pouch containing the wooden bird, its familiar shape a reassurance. A young woman with a smile too bright for the early hour greeted him, her words a rapid-fire burst of practiced enthusiasm. She led him to a green room, a small, windowless box furnished with a plush but slightly stained sofa and a table laden with pastries that looked more like art installations than food. He sat, not on the sofa, but on a straight-back chair in the corner, preferring the unyielding support. He watched the other guests, a comedian practicing lines under his breath, a self-help author exuding an unnerving calm, and felt a familiar sense of detachment. This was their world, a place of crafted personas and fleeting fame. His was a world of tangible things, of slow creation, of truths that took time to reveal themselves. He thought of the bird, its simple lines, the patient work of the knife. That was the only language he truly trusted. The producer from the phone call, a man named Arthur, flitted in, all apologies and nervous energy. "Mr. Thorne, so glad you could make it. Vivian is very excited to chat with you." Elias doubted Vivian Crane, the show's formidable host, felt anything as specific as excitement regarding his presence. He'd seen her on screen, sharp, witty, with an uncanny ability to dissect her guests or elevate them, often in the same breath. Her world, he sensed, was one of quick judgments and even quicker dismissals. He merely nodded, his gaze steady. Arthur filled the ensuing silence with more chatter about segments and timings, words that seemed to evaporate as soon as they were spoken. Elias listened, or appeared to, his mind elsewhere, perhaps in the grain of the cheap laminate table, or in the memory of the forest where he'd found the wood for the bird. He wasn't preparing lines. He was simply preparing to be himself, a task that seemed increasingly complex in environments designed to reshape everyone into a more palatable version. The quiet weight of his past settled around him, not as a burden, but as a familiar cloak. The stories it held were not for casual display, but if the moment demanded, he would not shy away from their truth. The call came sooner than he expected, another bright young face at the door. "Mr. Thorne? We're ready for you." He rose, his movements unhurried, his hand instinctively going to the pocket where the bird lay, a silent affirmation of who he was and what he carried. The transition from the hushed anticipation of the green room to the sensory assault of the studio stage was jarring. A wave of heat from the lights, 1,000 unseen eyes from the darkened audience, the faint, persistent hum of electronic equipment. It was a world designed to unnerve, to strip away composure. Elias Thorne walked into it with the same measured tread he used in his workshop, his gaze not darting to the cameras or the faces, but settling for a moment on the polished floor as if to find his grounding. The set was a confection of bright colors and comfortable-looking, but ultimately unyielding, furniture. Vivian Crane sat enthroned on a larger, more ornate chair, a queen in her televised court. She was smaller in person than she appeared on screen, but her presence filled the space, a vortex of carefully controlled energy. Her smile, when she turned it on him, was dazzling and utterly impersonal. "Elias Thorne, welcome to the Spotlight Hour," she said, her voice the familiar blend of warmth and authority that had captivated millions. "It's a pleasure to have a true artisan with us today." The word artisan was delivered with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis, as if marking him as a quaint curiosity. Elias inclined his head. "Thank you for having me." He took the offered seat, the low-slung armchair that forced a casual posture he didn't feel. He adjusted, sitting straighter than the chair seemed to intend, his hands resting on his knees. He felt the wooden bird in its pouch, a small, solid point in the swirling artifice. The preliminary questions were as expected, about his craft, the years he'd dedicated to it, the supposed romance of working with one's hands. Vivian guided the conversation with effortless skill, interjecting witty asides, drawing gentle laughter from the audience. Elias answered truthfully, his responses concise, unadorned. He spoke of the wood, its life, its character, the respect it demanded. He avoided hyperbole, letting the simple facts of his work stand on their own. He could feel Vivian trying to find an angle, a hook to make him more televisual. There was a subtle impatience in her eyes, a flicker of something that suggested he wasn't quite fitting the mold she had in mind. "It must be a very solitary life," she commented, a hint of pity, or perhaps condescension, lacing the observation. "Does it get lonely just you and the trees?" The audience tittered a soft, polite sound. Elias considered the question. "Solitary, yes. Lonely? That was a different matter." "There's a difference between being alone and being lonely," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the hushed studio. "Wood speaks, if you listen. It tells stories of its own." Vivian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Does it now? What kind of stories do your logs whisper to you, Elias?" The playful tone was back, but there was an edge to it, a gentle mockery that Elias recognized. It was the tone people used when confronted with something they didn't quite understand, or perhaps didn't want to. He didn't rise to the bait. He thought of the countless hours spent in his workshop, the silence broken only by the rasp of a plane, the tap of a chisel. It was in those silences that the truest things were often heard. He saw the slight tightening of Vivian's smile, the almost imperceptible tap of her pen against her notes. The segment wasn't flowing as she'd planned. He was too quiet, too real. The machinery of the show, designed for smooth transitions and predictable emotional beats, seemed to falter slightly around his unyielding authenticity. Arthur, the producer, probably watching from a darkened control room, would be growing anxious. Elias felt a strange calm. He hadn't come here to play their game. He had come with a single, unspoken purpose, and he would wait for the right moment, or create it if necessary. The pressure to perform, to entertain, was immense, a palpable force in the air. But the weight of the small wooden bird in his pocket was a counterpressure, a reminder of a different kind of gravity, a different kind of truth. He met Vivian's gaze, his own steady, unblinking. He was not a performer, but he was not without his own kind of strength. Vivian Crane, sensing the interview, was veering into less dynamic territory, shifted tactics. Her smile remained, but her eyes sharpened, searching for a vulnerability, a more compelling narrative thread. "You know, Elias," she began, leaning forward conspiratorially, "we hear you carry something quite special with you, a memento from your past, something that inspires all this dedication to the old ways." Her tone was laced with a feigned intimacy, a common tool in her arsenal to coax revelations from her guests. It was the opening Elias had been waiting for, though he hadn't anticipated it arriving cloaked in such practiced insincerity. He reached into his breast pocket and slowly withdrew the small leather pouch. The studio lights caught the worn texture of the leather, aged to a soft patina. For a moment, he simply held it in his palm, the silence in the studio deepening as the audience and Vivian watched, their curiosity piqued. He untied the delicate thong that secured the pouch and tipped its contents into his hand. The wooden bird lay there, small and unassuming, its lines simple yet profoundly evocative. It was carved from a pale, fine-grained wood, now darkened with age and the oils from his skin. There were no sharp edges. Every curve had been smoothed by time and touch. "This," Elias said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb the ambient studio noise, "is a knot-winger." He held it up, not ostentatiously, but so the nearest camera could capture it. A small bird known for its resilience. It builds its nest in the harshest of places, sings its song even when the wind tries to tear it away. Vivian tilted her head, a flicker of interest replacing the professional curiosity. "It's beautiful. Very rustic. Did you carve it yourself?" "I did," Elias confirmed. "A long time ago." He paused, the weight of that long time ago filling the space between them. He wasn't looking at Vivian now, but at the bird, as if drawing strength from its silent presence. "There was a war," he began, his voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. Not the grand, sweeping wars of history books, but a smaller, more personal conflict, one that had carved its lines onto his soul as surely as he had carved the bird. "I was young. We were all young. Too young for what we were asked to face." Vivian leaned back slightly, her expression becoming more guarded. This wasn't the charming anecdote about craftsmanship she had perhaps been angling for. The air in the studio grew stiller, the usual undercurrent of coughs and rustles ceasing. "I had a brother," Elias continued, his gaze distant. "Younger than me, full of life, always believed in the good in people, even when there was little evidence of it around us." He turned the small bird over in his fingers, its smooth surface a familiar comfort. He loved birds, said they were the only creatures that truly understood freedom. He wanted to be a forester, to spend his life among trees and their songs. The silence in the studio was absolute now, a hell breath. Elias's voice, though quiet, resonated with an undeniable power, the power of deeply felt truth. He wasn't performing grief. He was simply allowing its echo to be heard. Before he left for his last patrol, I promised him I'd carve him a knot-winger. As a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there's still music, still hope, still a reason to keep fighting, to keep building. His thumb traced the delicate curve of the bird's wing. He never came back from that patrol. The words hung in the air, stark and irrefutable. I finished the bird anyway. I've carried it ever since. He looked up then, directly at Vivian, his eyes holding a depth of sorrow and resilience that no stage light could diminish. "It's not just a piece of wood, Miss Crane. It's a promise kept. It's a story of what's lost and what endures." The studio was wrapped in a profound stillness, the kind that follows a revelation that transcends the ordinary. Vivian Crane's perfectly composed face faltered. For a fraction of a second, something raw and unscripted flickered in her eyes. Surprise, discomfort, perhaps even a sliver of shame. Then, the professional mask slid back, almost imperceptibly but not quite seamlessly. She blinked a little too rapidly. Her smile, when it returned, was strained, a pale imitation of its usual confident brilliance. She cleared her throat, a small, dry sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the prevailing silence. "Well," she began, her voice a shade too bright, too quick to pivot. "That's quite a story, Elias. Very moving. A testament to craftsmanship and memory, indeed." She picked up her pen, tapping it lightly against her notes as if to signal a change of pace, a return to safer, more manageable territory. Then, almost as an afterthought, a dismissive wave of her hand, subtle but unmistakable to anyone paying attention, she added, "We all have our little keepsakes, don't we? Things that remind us of, well, things." And with that, she glanced towards another camera, a clear indication that she considered the emotional depth of the moment concluded. A box ticked, ready to move on to something lighter, something more aligned with the show's relentless pursuit of upbeat entertainment. It was a masterful deflection, honed by years of navigating unpredictable guests and uncomfortable truths on live television. To the casual viewer, it might have seemed like a smooth transition. But to Elias, and to a growing number of people in the studio audience now leaning forward with a new, more somber attentiveness, it felt like a profound misjudgment, a jarring dissonance. The air, which had been filled with a fragile, shared humanity, suddenly chilled. The unspoken message was clear. Your pain is noted, filed, and now, let's get back to the program. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. A low murmur, quickly suppressed, rippled through the darker rows. A cameraman, usually impassive, held his shot on Elias a second longer than protocol probably dictated, his own expression unreadable. Elias felt the shift. It wasn't anger that rose in him, but a deep, familiar ache, the kind that comes from seeing something precious undervalued, something sacred treated as mundane. He looked at Vivian Crane, truly looked at her, seeing not the celebrity host, but a woman perhaps trapped by the very spotlight she commanded. He saw the fear behind the polish, the desperate need to keep the show moving, to avoid the genuine messiness of human experience. He held the wooden bird in his open palm. It felt warm, almost alive. The silence that followed Vivian's dismissive remark was different from the one that had accompanied his story. That silence had been respectful, contemplative. This one was taut, uncomfortable, pregnant with unspoken judgment. Elias didn't lower his gaze. He didn't fidget. He simply sat there, a still point in a suddenly turbulent emotional landscape. The small wooden bird a silent testament to the gravity of what had just been so casually brushed aside. His own stillness became a rebuke, more powerful than any shouted word. The studio, usually a place of controlled chaos and manufactured emotion, was now experiencing something entirely unscripted, the profound weight of a truth dismissed. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not let this pass. Not for himself, but for the memory the bird represented, and for every unspoken story that had ever been silenced by indifference. The fight wasn't over. It had merely taken a new, unexpected turn. The bird in his hand was more than a keepsake. It was a standard. Elias Thorne let the uncomfortable silence stretch, allowing its weight to settle over the studio. Vivian Crane's smile began to look more like a rictus, her eyes darting briefly towards her floor manager, a silent plea for intervention, for a commercial break, for anything to disrupt the palpable tension. But no intervention came. The moment belonged to Elias, to the quiet dignity of his story, and to the profound inelegance of its dismissal. When he finally spoke, his voice was not raised. It was calm, measured, yet it possessed a resonance that cut through the studio's artificiality like a well-honed chisel through soft pine. "Ms. Crane," he began, his gaze unwavering, meeting hers directly. "This is not a little keepsake." He enunciated each word with deliberate care, giving it its full due. The studio audience, which had been holding a collective breath, seemed to lean in further. Even the production crew in the periphery stilled, their usual bustling movements ceasing. It is not just something that reminds me of things. He paused, letting the echo of her own dismissive words hang in the air, exposing their inadequacy. This small piece of wood represents a life given in service to ideals that many today seem to find inconvenient to remember. His eyes, steady and clear, held no malice, only a profound, sorrowful gravity. My brother, and countless young men and women like him, did not offer their futures as a casual anecdote for a daytime television show. They did not endure hardship and sacrifice, so their memories could be marginalized as mere things. A hush had fallen over the studio, so profound that the hum of the lighting rigs seemed deafening. Vivian's composure was visibly cracking. The polished veneer was gone, revealing something uncertain, something vulnerable beneath. Her hands, usually so expressive, lay still in her lap. "You speak of spotlights," Elias continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "But some truths, Miss Crane, are best seen in a different kind of light. Not the glare of fleeting fame, but the steady glow of remembrance, of respect. The kind of light that honors sacrifice rather than trivializing it." He lifted the wooden bird slightly, its silhouette stark against the bright studio backdrop. This bird is a reminder that integrity is not a relic of the past, but a living principle. It's a reminder that some losses are so profound they shape not only our personal histories, but the moral fabric of who we aspire to be. To dismiss that as a little keepsake is to misunderstand the very nature of what it means to live a life of consequence, a life connected to something larger than oneself. He wasn't accusing. He was illuminating. His words weren't a personal attack, but a profound statement of values. He spoke of courage, not his own, but the courage of those who are no longer present to speak for themselves. He spoke of memory, not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. The camera remained tight on Elias, then slowly panned to capture Vivian's reaction. Her face was pale. The practiced smile had vanished completely, replaced by an expression of dawning realization, of acute discomfort. She looked, for the first time since he had met her, utterly and completely disarmed. The audience was rapt. There was no applause, no murmuring, only a deep, resonant silence that acknowledged the gravity of Elias's words. He had not raised his voice, had not resorted to histrionics, but he had reclaimed the narrative, not through force, but through the undeniable power of authentic, heartfelt conviction. The small wooden bird, still resting in his palm, seemed to radiate a quiet strength, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the quiet courage it takes to defend it. The atmosphere in the studio had undergone a profound metamorphosis. The bright, almost frantic energy that usually propelled the spotlight hour had dissipated, replaced by a stillness that was both somber and electric. It was the kind of quiet that falls when something true and undeniable has been spoken, something that resonates beyond the superficialities of entertainment. Vivian Crane sat frozen, her usually animated features slack with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The notes in her lap seemed irrelevant, props from a play whose script had just been irrevocably rewritten. Her eyes, which had earlier held a dismissive glint, were now fixed on Elias, wide and unblinking, reflecting a turmoil that was clearly internal. One of her co-hosts, seated further down the crescent-shaped desk and usually quick with a supportive quip, remained silent, their gaze lowered, absently tracing patterns on the desk with a fingertip. Even the seasoned crew, accustomed to the unpredictable nature of live television, seemed to hold their positions with a new kind of reverence. A cameraman slowly zoomed in on the small wooden bird resting in Elias's calloused palm, its simple form now imbued with a profound significance. The image on the studio monitors was stark and powerful. The weathered hand, the handcrafted bird, symbols of endurance and memory against the backdrop of a world obsessed with the new and the fleeting. In the audience, the shift was palpable. Faces that had been politely attentive or passively entertained were now etched with introspection. A woman in the front row subtly wiped a tear from her eye. An older man, his own face lined with the map of a long life, nodded slowly, a gesture of deep accord. The usual ambient sounds of a live studio, the rustle of clothing, a stifled cough, the whisper of a floor director's instructions, were conspicuously absent. It was as if everyone present understood, instinctively, that they were witnessing a moment of rare and unvarnished truth, a moment that demanded their full, unmediated attention. Elias Thorne himself remained a pillar of quiet strength. He had said what needed to be said. He sought no applause, no validation beyond the simple act of speaking his truth. His posture was unchanged, his expression calm, though his eyes held the deep, lingering sorrow of his remembered loss, now shared, now made manifest in the charged air of the studio. The power dynamic had inverted. The celebrity host, usually in effortless command, was now rendered speechless, vulnerable. The unassuming craftsman, the man of wood and memory, now held the room, not through charisma or showmanship, but through the sheer, unassailable weight of his integrity. The silence stretched, no longer uncomfortable, but filled with a heavy, contemplative grace. It was a silence that allowed Elias's words to sink in, to find purchase in the hearts and minds of those who heard them. The small wooden bird, a mere token by worldly standards, had become a catalyst, transforming a routine television segment into a profound meditation on loss, remembrance, and the enduring importance of human dignity. The gears of the usually well-oiled television machine had ground to a halt, paused by the unexpected intervention of something profoundly, uncomfortably real. The spotlight, for once, was illuminating not a performance, but a soul. Vivian Crane finally broke the silence, her voice uncharacteristically subdued, stripped of its usual confident cadence. It was softer, thinner, almost fragile. "Mr. Thorne," she began, and then paused, swallowing visibly. She looked down at her hands, then back up at Elias, her eyes holding a new, raw emotion. It wasn't the practiced empathy of a seasoned host. It was something genuine, something that had clearly broken through layers of professional detachment. I owe you an apology." The words came out haltingly, each one seemingly costing her an effort. The transformation was startling. The sharp, incisive television personality had momentarily receded, revealing a woman genuinely shaken, genuinely contrite. "I was dismissive, and I was wrong." She didn't look at the cameras, didn't play to the audience. Her focus was entirely on Elias, her gaze direct, holding his with a newfound humility. "What you shared, it wasn't just a story. It was sacred, and I treated it lightly." A flush rose on her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and what looked like genuine remorse. "In this business," she continued, a hint of weariness creeping in her tone, "we get so used to packaging things. Sound bites, quick emotions. We move so fast. Sometimes, I think, we forget to truly listen, to feel." She gestured vaguely at the set, the lights, the unseen machinery of the show. "This place, it can make you lose perspective on what truly matters." Elias listened, his expression unchanged, his gaze steady. He offered no immediate absolution, allowing her words to unfold, to find their own weight. He understood, perhaps better than she realized, the pressures of a world that often valued artifice over authenticity. He had seen it in the way people treated old things, old ways, old stories, with a polite but ultimately shallow interest, eager to move on to the next new shine. "Your brother's memory," Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion now, "and the love you so clearly hold for him, that deserves the utmost respect. And I failed to give it. I am truly sorry." The apology, when it came fully, felt unfeigned. The studio audience remained silent, witnessing this unexpected moment of vulnerability from a woman known for her unflappable composure. It was in its own way as powerful as Elias's earlier testimony. It was an admission of fallibility, a crack in the armor of celebrity, a human moment in an often inhuman environment. Elias considered her words. He saw the effort they cost her, the genuine distress in her eyes. His own heart, though long accustomed to carrying sorrow, was not impervious to sincere remorse. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Apology accepted, Ms. Crane," he said, his voice retaining its quiet authority but softened by a perceptible degree of understanding. He wasn't there to shame her, but to awaken a sense of what had been overlooked. "It is not always easy," he added, "to hear the quiet voices in a world that shouts so loudly." The exchange, though brief, had shifted the emotional landscape once more. The tension had eased, replaced by a fragile sense of reconciliation. Vivian let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a long time. She managed a small, tentative smile, not of triumph or relief, but of gratitude. The confrontation, born of a dismissed truth, had culminated not in further conflict, but in a moment of unexpected grace and a profound, shared understanding. The remainder of the segment unfolded in a markedly different tenor. The usual brisk pace of the spotlight hour slowed, the atmosphere imbued with a gravitas that lingered long after Vivian Crane's apology. She made no attempt to steer the conversation back to lighter topics. Instead, she seemed content to let the space be filled with a more reflective quality. She asked Elias, her voice still gentle, more about the knot-winger bird itself, not its sentimental value, which had been so powerfully established, but its symbolism as he saw it. "You said it's known for its resilience," Vivian prompted, her tone now genuinely inquisitive. Elias nodded. "It finds purchase in unlikely places. It endures. I believe there's a lesson in that for all of us. That even when circumstances are harsh, when the winds are strong, there is still a capacity within us to build, to create, to sing our own song, however quiet it may be." He spoke not as a preacher, but as a man sharing deeply held convictions, forged in the crucible of experience. His words, simple and direct, resonated with a wisdom that transcended the manufactured insights often peddled on such shows. The audience listened with an attentiveness that was almost palpable. Phones remained in pockets, side conversations ceased. It was as if a collective hunger for something genuine, something real, was being unexpectedly satisfied. Vivian, for her part, listened more than she spoke, a rare occurrence. When she did interject, it was with questions that sought deeper understanding rather than sound bites. "Do you think," she asked thoughtfully, "that in our modern rush we've lost some of that ability to appreciate endurance? To value the stories that take time to unfold?" Elias considered this. "Perhaps," he allowed. "Speed has its place, but so does patience. Some things, the most valuable things like trust or love or a skill honed over a lifetime, cannot be rushed. They require tending. They require us to slow down, to pay attention to the details, to the whispers rather than the shouts." He gestured subtly with the hand holding the wooden bird. "This took time, not just the carving, but the meaning it absorbed. That is a slow alchemy. The cameras, once darting between host and guest, now often lingered on Elias, or on the bird, allowing viewers to absorb the quiet power of his presence. The segment, which had been scheduled for a mere 10 minutes, stretched on, the producers in the control room evidently recognizing the rare quality of the moment and choosing not to curtail it. There was no attempt to inject artificial excitement, no forced laughter. The emotional arc had been organic, profound, and it was allowed to breathe. When the time finally came for a commercial break, Vivian announced it with a newfound sobriety. "We'll be right back with Elias Thorne," she said, looking directly at him with an expression of sincere respect. "Stay with us." During the break, the studio remained quieter than usual. Elias sat calmly, the bird still in his hand. Vivian didn't engage in the usual off-air chatter with her crew. She remained in her seat, seemingly lost in thought, occasionally glancing towards Elias with an unreadable expression. The experience had clearly affected her, perhaps in ways she herself had yet to fully process. The superficial shell of the television personality had been pierced, and something more authentic, more thoughtful, had emerged. The quiet craftsman, with his simple wooden bird and his unwavering commitment to memory, had in his own unassuming way brought a moment of profound truth to a place often starved of it. The impact was undeniable, a silent testament to the power of a story told with integrity and heard, finally, with an open heart. As the show neared its end, Vivian Crane turned to Elias Thorne one last time. The earlier tension had completely dissolved, replaced by an atmosphere of quiet respect and shared understanding. The studio audience, which had been taken on an unexpected emotional journey, remained deeply engaged, their attention fixed on the unassuming man who had so profoundly shifted the day's narrative. "Elias," Vivian said, her voice gentle, "before we let you go, is there one final thought you'd like to share with our viewers? Perhaps something about the importance of remembering or the strength we find in these connections to our past." She no longer referred to the wooden bird as a mere keepsake. Her language reflected the lesson she had absorbed. Elias looked out, not directly at the camera, but seemingly towards a point beyond it, as if addressing not just the studio audience or the viewers at home, but something more universal. He held the wooden bird cupped in his hands, a small, potent symbol of all he had spoken of. "Memory," he began, his voice calm and steady, "is not simply about looking backward. It is about carrying forward the lessons, the love, the sacrifices that have shaped us. It is what gives depth and meaning to the present and guidance for the future." He paused, allowing the words to settle. We live in a world that often urges us to forget, to move on quickly, to discard the old in favor of the new. But there is a strength in remembering. There is a wisdom in honoring the legacies we inherit, the stories that make us who we are. His gaze then shifted, meeting Vivian's directly. And it is important, I believe, to create spaces where these quiet stories can be heard, where vulnerability is not seen as weakness, and where the truth, however painful, is met not with dismissal, but with empathy. He didn't need to elaborate. The entire arc of their interaction had been a testament to that very point. The small wooden bird, once a private token of remembrance, had become a public emblem of this principle. Its journey into the spotlight had been fraught, but ultimately, its simple truth had prevailed. Vivian nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting a profound agreement. "Thank you, Elias," she said, her voice imbued with a sincerity that was unmistakable. "Thank you for your courage, for your wisdom, and for sharing such a deeply personal part of yourself with us. You've given us all a great deal to reflect upon." As the show's closing music began to swell, a rare thing happened. The studio audience, unprompted, rose to their feet. It wasn't the boisterous, cheering ovation that often accompanied celebrity guests. It was a quieter, more reverent standing acknowledgement, a collective expression of respect for the man and his message. Elias Thorne, a man unaccustomed to such displays, simply inclined his head, a gesture of humble gratitude. He had not sought applause, but he accepted the sentiment behind it. The true victory, he knew, was not in the ovation, but in the possibility that a few hearts had been touched, a few minds opened, a few memories honored. The little wooden bird, symbol of endurance and quiet song, had found its voice in the most unlikely of places, and its melody lingered in the air long after the lights began to dim. Elias Thorne left the studio much as he had arrived, quietly, with his measured gait, the small leather pouch containing the wooden bird now securely back in his breast pocket. The frantic energy of the backstage corridors seemed to swirl around him, yet not quite touch him. Producers and crew members, who had earlier bustled past with barely a glance, now nodded respectfully as he passed. Some even offered a quiet "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," their expressions reflecting the unusual impact of the segment. Arthur, the producer who had initially invited him, met him near the exit, his face a mixture of relief and awe. "That was extraordinary, Elias," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I don't think we've ever had a segment quite like it. You really reached people." Elias offered a slight, non-committal smile. Reaching people hadn't been his primary intention. Speaking truth had. If the former followed the latter, then that was a welcome consequence. He stepped out of the air-conditioned chill of the building into the crisp autumn air. The city's roar, which had seemed overwhelming on his arrival, now felt different, somehow muted, or perhaps it was his own internal landscape that had shifted. He did not feel triumphant, nor did he feel drained. He felt a quiet sense of completion, the satisfaction of a task undertaken with integrity and seen through to its end. The encounter with Vivian Crane, her initial dismissal and subsequent heartfelt apology, replayed in his mind, not as a victory, but as a complex human interaction, a reminder that even in the most polished facades, there could be a capacity for change, for genuine feeling. He thought of the wooden bird, now resting against his chest. It had been a silent witness, a conduit for a story that needed to be told. For years, it had been a private symbol. Today, for a brief, intense period, its significance had resonated in a public forum, touching lives he would never know in ways he could never measure. That, he mused, was the unexpected power of sharing one's truth, however humbly. He walked towards the bus stop, eschewing the offer of a car service from the studio. The rhythm of the city, the anonymous faces in the crowd, the mundane realities of everyday life. These were a welcome return to his own familiar world. The spotlight had been an alien environment, but he had navigated it on his own terms, carrying his own light within him. As he sat on the bus, watching the urban landscape slide by, his hand instinctively went to the pouch. The bird was still there, a small, solid presence. It had faced the glare and remained unchanged, its simple truth intact. Elias Thorne, the quiet craftsman, the keeper of memories, carried his own world within him, a world where integrity was paramount, and where even the smallest, most unassuming objects could hold the greatest weight. The experience on the spotlight hour would eventually fade into memory, another story to be absorbed into the rich tapestry of his life. But the echo of that moment, the quiet power of a truth spoken and finally heard, would endure, much like the resilient little knot-winger bird he carried close to his heart.